All right. Hi, everybody. Welcome. I'm Dan Freeman from ALA Publishing, and we are really glad to have you here today for Digitization in Libraries, the September episode of American Libraries Live. We've got a fantastic panel. We're going to have a great discussion. I just want to start by thanking the San Jose State School of Information for their sponsorship. Sandy Hirsch, the director of the school, is joining us today. Welcome, Sandy.
Thank you, Dan. The School of Information at San Jose State University is really proud to sponsor today's American Libraries Live episode about digitization in libraries. As Dan said, I'm the director of the School of Information at San Jose State University, and when I learned about today's topic, I knew that the school had to get involved. We've been talking a lot about digital information and how that's shaping library and information environments and what that means for librarians and other information professionals. I think you'll agree it can be challenging, but it's also exciting as new technologies present new opportunities. And along those lines, I'm really excited to announce that the iSchool now offers a new advanced certificate in strategic management of digital assets and services. This program is 100% online, just like all of our school's offerings, and it prepares students to tackle the increasingly complex world of digital assets and services, and also to manage all types of digital content successfully and make it accessible to their users. We also offer an ALA accredited master's degree in library and information science, a postmaster certificate in library and information science, and other lifelong learning solutions. All of our programs, as I mentioned, are delivered 100% online, and we continually introduce new courses targeting skills that employers seek. So Alice Scott, who teaches courses on digitization for students in our 100% online programs and is a panelist for today's episode, will speak more about why we must embrace new technologies and continue to innovate. So I'm really excited to have this really distinguished panel of speakers that will be joining us in this important discussion. And I'm going to hand it back over to you guys so you can so we can begin the discussion. And thank you again. I'm excited about today.
All right, thank you so much, Sandy, and thanks for joining us. So let me introduce our panel. First, I want to introduce Suzanne Caro. Suzanne's the Government Documents Librarian at the University of Montana. She's an author and frequent speaker on libraries and digitization. Welcome, Suzanne.
Thank you for having me here.
And I want to introduce Julie Warren. Julie is the digital librarian at the Georgetown Digital Library in South Carolina. Welcome, Julie.
Thank you.
And I want to introduce Alice Scott. Alice, welcome.
Hi, everyone. Sorry I was running a little late there.
Oh, you're right on time. Alice joined us just as we were running up to the start time here, but she's here. And Alice is a lecturer at the School of Information at San Jose State. So thank you for being here, Alice. And let's just dive right in. So I just want to start with sort of a quick round-robin question. I just want to ask, and this is a vague, sort of a general question, why is digitization so important to libraries today? And I want to just sort of ask you for your, we said before the event we were going to kind of do an elevator speech response. So if you can just kind of give us your quick response to that very general question. And Alice, why don't we start with you?
Okay, thank you, Dan. Well, I think that one of the reasons that digitization is so important for libraries today is because of access to those primary unique resources that they have. And I think that aggregating these resources is really important. And it's going to provide us with new resources for researchers and for everyone else as well. So scholarship opportunities, etc. So that's kind of my little elevator speech about why libraries should be digitizing.
All right, thanks, Alice. Julie, how about you?
Sure. I will sort of piggyback off what Alice said and just add the element of preservation. Living here on the coast of South Carolina, we have a lot of issues with moisture. Hurricanes certainly are a problem as well, and we constantly come across people that have lost documents to hurricanes and storms and moisture and whatever. And so I think really preservation long term, we have documents in our own library from the 18th and 19th century. We've really had a chance to preserve those in a really new and unique way. So I think really preservation is what I kind of go for.
Great, thanks, Julie. And Suzanne, finally to you.
I would add that an important aspect of digitization is going to be outreach and increased awareness. A lot of the materials that you're putting out are really going to give a different face to your library and your institution. It's going to be available to the world, and you can really promote what you do and actually even get your public to help with it as well.
All right, thanks, Suzanne. And I meant to mention this at first, but I want to encourage our audience out there to interact. I do understand it looks like we're having a couple of problems with our chat space. So I apologize about that. We're going to try to work on getting that resolved. But everybody can interact on Twitter using the hashtag ALLive. And that's ALLive, not alive. So remember the second L there. But please use that as your forum. You can interact with our panel there. If you have questions, comments, or concerns, you can help us direct the conversation today. So we want you to be part of the conversation. So moving on, thanks everybody for your initial thoughts. Why don't we talk about the key challenges that libraries face when it comes to digitization? And there are a lot of them. And Alice, I think we're getting a tiny bit of audio interference on your end.
I bet you are. It's pouring down rain here.
Oh, is it?
You want me to mute while I'm not speaking?
If that's possible, or
sure.
If you could just move, or if it's possible, just move the mic a little further away. That might work too. But yeah, that's. I think we have all 4 time zones represented, by the way, between the 4 of us. So we have all different variations of U.S. weather. So let's talk about the challenges that libraries face. And Suzanne, I want to start with you, both because you were last time, so I'll let you go first this time, but also because you've really worked in a pretty wide variety of library jobs. So let's talk about funding. What are the big challenges that libraries face there?
Well, one of the big fundings issues is that no one seems to have the funding. As things change, as you have recessions, you have issues with staff, you have issues with where is that money going to go. So what a lot of libraries are doing is they're finding other libraries or institutions to help them, and they're going out for grants. They're looking for fundraisers. There's been a few libraries that have actually put together whole digitization programs based on fundraising. So I don't think there's a one option for everyone. It's going to be a real mix of looking at what funding you can get from your community, from grants, and then what support you can get from other institutions.
Okay. Julie, what are your thoughts on funding as someone who works in a public digital library?
I agree with Suzanne. We were lucky enough in 2007 to receive a grant from the Gaylord and Dorothy Donnelly Foundation that really sort of helped us to create the digital library that exists today. That grant was extremely helpful, of course, because it not only gave us a chance to start to work in our own archives, but we also worked within our community. So we worked within our community to help them preserve their own documents within some of the museums and institutions. Over the years, we've had some extra staff that we've been able to hire part-time, but throughout most of these 7-8 years that we've been working on this, I've actually been really the only staff member, so there is always a staffing issue. The grant has obviously finished at this point, so now that we are grantless, we are at the mercy of our county, which we're very thankful for our county for helping us out in any way, but there are definitely continuing funding challenges. And also really, because we were able to start this great digital library and start out with a bang, we want to be able to continue that. So we kind of have to keep our momentum up, even though the money may not be there, the staff may not be there. We're trying to continue to really keep at that level and continue to go up from that. So those are challenges, but we're lucky enough that we do have some good support in our community to help us do that.
All right, thanks, Julie. And Alice, let me ask you the same question about funding.
I think funding is a huge challenge for most libraries, and I think this is where grant programs are so important. I know in Illinois, where I am, LSTA funds, the Illinois State Library actually has a portion of their LSTA money that they try to a lot for digital grants, and they have been able to do that again for the last couple of years, so it's kind of exciting to me. But it remains a huge problem for most libraries, I think.
All right, thank you. Thank you all so very much. And I just want to remind our audience again, you can join the conversation on Twitter. Right now, we are having some sort of a problem with our chat space on the live screen, so we're working on getting that figured out. But you can tweet at hashtag #ALLive. In fact, I'm going to put that on my little cryon here so everybody can see it. But yeah, our hashtag today is AL Live, so if you want to join the conversation and help guide what we're talking about, I see a lot of people tweeting out there already, so thanks for doing that. Any questions, any comments you want to give, any direction you want to give to the panelists, we'd love to hear from you. So I know another key challenge that we face is staffing. Staffing is a huge issue with anything, of course, but with digitization, you've got issues of training, technology, that sort of thing. So Julie, why don't we start with you this time? Let's talk about how staffing is a challenge when it comes to digitization.
As I mentioned, a lot of the years that we've been working on our digital library, it's been largely me. We were lucky when we had the grant to be able to work with OCLC and Content DM to do some of the issues on their end to help scan and outsource basically to some other organizations. But staffing is an issue. But we have a really great community that understands that we have time limits and staff issues, so we just continue to work. And if we get a small grant that allows us to hire somebody part-time, then we certainly jump on it and take advantage of that. And it does help tremendously. Of course, with the staffing issues, it's not just the scanning, but it's also the metadata collecting and that sort of thing that we find to be very time-consuming. So we really try to bring in staff, even within the library, to help occasionally to identify photographs or do transcriptions and other things that we can do as time allows on their schedules too.
Okay, thanks, Julie. Alice, how about you?
I'd like to piggyback on what Julie was saying about metadata creation. I find that that is one of the things that takes more time than anything in a digital project, and so many libraries don't either. I've worked with a lot of small libraries, and they either don't have someone on staff who can do it, or don't have the expertise, even if they have someone on staff who normally catalogs. And oftentimes they do require volunteers to come in because they don't know enough about the images already, and so they bring in the community. And I think that's a nice way to get the community involved. But yes, staffing is another one of those issues that is just hard to it's hard to address it really easily.
Okay, and Suzanne, how about you?
Well, with volunteers, there's a few things to keep in mind, one of which is if you have volunteers working on a project, it's always nice to cross-train them because metadata entry can get rather dull, scanning can get rather dull, uploading all those files, and you want to be able to keep them engaged with those materials. And if you do have an individual with interest in a specific area, it can be really helpful to put them in charge of those particular documents. I would also say that there are some libraries that have had some success with crowdsourcing as well. Cambridge Public Library is one of them. And they digitized a large number of newspapers and have a program set up where people can log in and create the transcripts for those newspapers, and increases the searchability of those documents from somewhere around maybe 75–80% depending to about 95–99%. And that's just people who are interested in these time periods or these subjects who are willing to spend time to work on this. And they might have a large number of people who just come in and maybe do an hour a week or an hour a month, but that builds up over time. So it's always worth it to see what different possibilities are out there for volunteers.
All right, thanks, Suzanne. And actually, I'm going to stay with you because we got our first question from the audience. Shelly G144 on Twitter has asked, how do you handle challenges when it comes to staff buy-in and digitization? So, Suzanne, I want to ask, have you run into any challenges like that?
That can be a huge challenge sometimes. You have a lot of issues, some of which is, does someone feel that they should be in charge of something but they're not? I think more and more it's getting easier to show that this has considerable value. And there's a lot of libraries now that you can look at for examples to say, this is what this library has done and this is how effective it is, but also to really promote those great unique resources that might be behind a locked door or in a filing cabinet or in a cage in a basement. That was actually a case with the library in Bangor, Maine. Once those start to come out, people have an opportunity to interact with them and to use them. And if people aren't getting excited about what you have in your library, that might be another issue. But as long as you can bring up those stories and maybe even work programming around some of these materials, everybody feels that they can actually contribute, even if they're not involved with the physical digitizing or metadata part of that.
Right. Alice, let me ask you the same question, because I know as an instructor you probably work with people at a lot of different points in their LIS careers. So what have you learned about staff buy-in and how that can be an issue?
Well, I've learned that oftentimes when people are doing digitization, I've actually had students who do digitization in their institution, and they have bought in already. But I'm finding the problem is that their institutions sometimes don't understand the basics of things like creating one master image. You know, I see a lot of institutions creating PDF images, and that's their only image, and things like that. And so I think getting buy-in to follow standards and best practices is the key there that I see problems with.
All right, thanks, Alice. And Julie, let's go back to you.
I really think everyone else said it's been very accurate. You know, I am in a very small public library in the coast here, and you know, so many of our staff members are from this area or from an area that's similar to this, and they just have a real appreciation of what we're doing and how we're working to save the history of the community. You know, I have found that our historic photographs, for example, can really, I mean, people just love a historic photograph, and we put some on the walls for decoration and that sort of thing, and it brings people together, and the staff love to point them out. They like to, you know, talk to people about it, why it's important. So I really just found that our staff and our community really just have a real interest in that idea of preserving their history.
All right, thanks, Julie. I want to share a web page here. This was just tweeted out to us as a great example of how crowdsourcing can help with digitization. This is a postcard project from McMaster University, so thank you very much. I don't have the name in front of me, but to the librarian who tweeted this out, thank you very much. But looks like what's gone on here. Here, let's look at the instructions page. So you just pick a postcard from the main page, take a good look, fill in the blanks for information if it doesn't say. So yeah, this is fantastic. This looks like they've gotten their whole community involved in this project. It's very cool. So here, I'm just going to stop screen sharing so you guys can see me again. But yeah, that's a great example. So thank you to Alicia, who tweeted that out. And we have another audience comment, and I want to stick with you, Julie, here, because I think with your job, this is this is particularly relevant to you. So this is a comment, but I want to get your comment back on it. Somebody said that sometimes understanding that not everything needs digitizing is another challenge. So how do you feel about that? Is that something you've run into?
It is a challenge, and it's something that I have had to work with and change my ideas on over the 8 years that I've been doing this. I actually come from a background in museums and preservation, so I tend to come through things a little bit differently than sometimes some of my colleagues or compatriots do. So, you know, there was a point in time, and there are some times that I want to save every little item, every detail that I can save, but there are also times that I realize that that's just not possible. You know, there's a big idea of just saving, you know, if you have a group of photos, for instance, and they're all very similar, not every single one has to be scanned. They can pick and choose between the one that is the best view and that sort of thing. So, yeah, it's something that changes, and based on my experiences over time, I go back and forth on it.
All right. And Suzanne, your thoughts on the same topic?
Well, it's very true that not everything has to be digitized. You only have so much time. You only have so many resources to put these materials in. But in some cases, it's worth it just to have that one image, even if it isn't great, because it's the only one that exists. It might be the only image of a building that is no longer there. It also sort of depends on why you are digitizing to begin with. So if you are digitizing for preservation, you're going to have different parameters and different goals for that. If you are digitizing to put some materials up for an anniversary, you can be very specific and not go through quite all of the steps that you would for another process. So it's really going to depend on what your overall goals for that material is. If your goal is to save absolutely everything, you might want to reconsider just a little bit.
Okay. And Alice, your thoughts?
That's what I like to call the kitchen sink method of digitization. Everything, including the kitchen sink. I agree. I agree with Julie and Suzanne. Sometimes not everything can be digitized, and sometimes it might be a structural issue with an item as well. I think that this is why selection is so important. Also, I tell my students that you want to get your most bang for the buck. If you have a grant to digitize a particular collection, then you want to make sure that you can do as much as you possibly can. And this is another reason that, you know, the reason that you're digitizing is important as much as the importance of the materials themselves. So, yeah.
All right, thank you very much. And thank you to our audience for the great questions. I mentioned this already, but just for anyone who joined late, we're having some sort of technical issue with our chat space. I'm not sure if we're going to be able to get that resolved, but you can use hashtag ALLive to tweet your questions and comments. For the panelists, we do want you to be part of the conversation. So thank you to those of you who submitted questions. That's great. It helps us shape our discussion. So let's talk. We've been talking about staff. I'll ask sort of a general question, and I'll ask you for sort of the condensed version of the answer, because this is obviously something you could talk about for hours. But I want to ask how you approach training your staff when it comes to digitization. And Suzanne, why don't we start with you?
Well, first, it's going to depend on the workflow. How can you work different tasks into the workflow? And where do people have the most interest? As I said, this can be sometimes a tedious process. So how long will it take? What quality of image are you doing with some of the older scans? If you want to do a really high resolution scan, they might also want to have a book with them as well, because it's going to take a while. And just to cross-train so people know the different steps and what they're doing and how it's contributing to the overall process, and to give them that ability to switch around and change and give everyone a chance to work with some of the really interesting materials.
All right, thanks, Suzanne. Alice, can we get your thoughts?
I agree with Suzanne. I think that that's really important, that cross-training, and also getting your staff to see the big picture, you know, where what they're doing right now fits in and how all these little pieces come into the chain of digitization, basically, to get them to see it from beginning to end. So I totally agree with that approach.
All right, thanks. And Julie, your thoughts?
Sure, I agree with what they've both said, and I would also say that, you know, like Suzanne was saying, have them try different things. I have staff that have, you know, more interest or maybe a better skill at doing one type of thing. Maybe they're not as great as transcribing as somebody else can. So if somebody really enjoys transcribing, so you know, really work towards their skill level and their interest. So absolutely, I just agree with what they're saying on that. So you just really read your staff and try to get what they're interested in.
Great. And we have a relevant point, a relevant comment and question here from Lando Loves on Twitter. He says, perhaps selecting material for digitization should be clarified as part of a broader collection policy. A digitization policy would help users understand that material is digitized intentionally. So Julie, why don't we stick with you? Do you have a specific digitization policy as part of your collections policy?
We do have a specific policy on that. And again, it's something that we've kind of gradually worked on over the years. It was not something that we originally created immediately when we started, just because we were trying to sort of get a feeling for what was going on. In 2007, the digital libraries were still sort of up and coming, and we really didn't know what to base it off of. So it is something that we've continued to work with. It's fairly set in stone, but at the same time, we can go through and modify it if we find that we need to. So we do try to have a basic policy, and when we talk with new institutions or organizations that want to work with us, we have a set standards that we have them try to follow. But sometimes we do have a little wiggle room on that if we need to, really depending on what the collection is. We really try to collect things that are related to Georgetown County, but sometimes we've come across some collections that are not specifically Georgetown County, but we think are really worth saving anyway, and so we'll go ahead and scan those and include them. So we do have a policy. We do try to stick to it as much as we can, but sometimes we do sidestep it a little bit.
Sure. And Suzanne, do you have a policy as well?
We do have a policy, which is fairly broad, but we also have a committee that is the group that determines what our next project's going to be. And they look at things such as if it's an item of high use, if it's a preservation issue, if it's something people are going to be very interested in. And we've actually had programs where we've sent students to other institutions, actually to the National Archives, to get some of that material and digitize it, because we know that our students and our faculty here and our community are going to be really interested in those materials. And I would like to add, too, we tend to focus on a lot of the two-dimensional materials and the images and the documents, but there's also a lot of interest, too, in digitizing old microfilm to make that more accessible, or going for cassette tapes or film strips, items that are also very useful when they're digitized and are also in danger of falling apart just due to age. So all of those items have to be taken into consideration, and if it's a preservation issue, that might bump it up a little bit.
All right, thank you. And Alice, can you give us your thoughts on having a digitization policy?
I think it's really important. I don't have one now because I don't work in a library, but when I did, I worked at the Illinois State Library, and we did have a general policy, and it revolved a lot around preservation issues and also the type of material that it was. We gave priority to things like Illinois documents, state documents, and what people were needing to use. So again, we had a committee as well that looked at the policy and looked at various collections that we thought we might want to digitize. So yeah, very similar to what Julie and Suzanne have.
Great, thanks. And that actually, one of our audience questions from Benjamin asked how you decide what items should be digitized. So I think you answered Benjamin's question too, so thank you for that. And I want to shift gears now to technology. We were planning to discuss this anyway, but we're already getting a lot of audience questions about technology. So let's just start, same question, and we'll start with you on this one, Suzanne. What are the key challenges you think libraries face when it comes to technology and digitization?
Actually, I think technology is working very much in our favor at this point. If you look back a few years ago, the equipment that you needed to scan was very expensive. It's becoming more and more reasonable. Also, over time, there are more companies that are interested and have fairly good rates for doing digitization if you want to outsource those materials. Where we get into a little more iffy area is the preservation of the digital materials and how you're going to go about and keep these items. There's that old saying that, if you put it on the internet, it's going to be there forever. Well, we know that's not true. And I have spoken to some libraries who have lost collections. So those are things that we need to keep in mind. And we're looking at the migration of files in order to keep them accessible. We're looking at older files and how to emulate the programs that are going to allow you to access those in the future. So there's a lot of interesting places there, but that's where I see technology as being a little bit more of a challenge.
All right. Alice, how about you?
I totally agree. I think it's the preservation of the digital objects that is really the biggest challenge we face now. As Suzanne mentioned, technology is becoming cheaper, easier to get, but we can keep those zeros and ones alive forever, but can we make sense of them? I don't know. And I'm quoting Richard Pierce Moses from the Arizona State Library and Archives. He said that years ago, and it stuck with me. And I think it's so true that preservation is really the biggest issue. Emulation, migration, all of those things.
All right, and Julie.
Well, I have to say again, I agree 100% with what was just said, because I think, we all have in our archives, we all have VHS and cassette tapes and things that are no longer necessarily usable on some levels. So I think there's a real worry that what we're doing now, we want to make sure that it's worthwhile for the future. So I think, on our end, when we first started this again 8 years ago, to say that again, we had a real concern as to what to do with these files that we were creating. Obviously we don't want to keep them on our hard drive. We don't want to keep them in the building, that sort of thing. But what do we do with them? Where do we save everything? We back everything up. Again, kind of paranoid to the extent because we have so many hurricanes. We have things in random places, but there is a concern on that. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. All right. Well, we sort of brushed up against this already. We'll stick with you here, Julie, but we did get an audience question. How do we meet the challenges of quickly running out of server space?
Well, that is a good question. We actually, we do work. I work with the county, so we're lucky enough that we can work with them on that issue. A lot of our stuff too is stored in other places that have a large capacity. It's one of the things we were able to work with, and we had that grant. Again, we're very blessed to have that lovely grant that helped us to sort of look toward the future and take care of that. We also do work with Content DM to host our website, and our issues there are great. So we've been able to do a couple of other things creatively, think out of the box, so to speak. So we're doing pretty well on that, but there is always that worry of running out of space.
Sure. And Julie, how do you deal with that same issue?
Like I said, we kind of, here in the county, we do okay on that. I don't have a real issue on that. We do have large enough servers here that I can make sure that doesn't happen.
Okay. And Suzanne, how about you?
Well, we have some dedicated server space, but we also work with other institutions. So some of our material is hosted by the Montana Memory Project. And I think that is probably one of the best ways to look at this, is to look at all of the options. Lots of copies keep stuff safe. It's the locks method. So if you can work with another institution like your state library or your state historical society or even Internet Archive or Digital Public Library of America, those kinds of institutions can sometimes help you with providing server space, because that does get expensive, or just to have another copy somewhere else that is not in your location. So should the worst happen, you're going to have that extra location. But if you can work with another larger group that's already doing that and has multiple servers, that's a great option.
And Alice, I want to get your thoughts. Based on what I'm seeing on Twitter, this is definitely a concern for a lot of people.
It's a huge concern, just as many of these issues are. But I want to agree with Suzanne about that. I'm so glad she brought up the locks. Lots of copies keep stuff safe, because this is an important thing to remember. Even if you lose a copy someplace, if you have a copy someplace else, I know in Illinois we used Content DM as our host for our materials, and also the Illinois State Library provides a place for small institutions and institutions that have received grants from Illinois as well to keep their materials, the Illinois Digital Archives, for example. And I know that just recently the Illinois State Library was named a hub for the Digital Public Library of America. So they'll be doing that. They'll be funneling things into DPLA as well. So that's really exciting.
Great, yeah, and we wanted to talk. That's a good transition point, because I know when we chatted before we started today, we said we wanted to talk about collaboration. I think all three of you felt collaboration was a really important point. So Julie, why don't we? I'll give you a chance to go first this time, Julie.
Okay.
Let's talk about collaboration, and how does digitization lead to increased collaboration between libraries?
Well, I'd have to say that, again, on our project, we've had a chance to really collaborate with not just libraries, but also museums. In the early stages, we did work with our local museums and organizations here in Georgetown. We worked with about 8 other partners to really kind of create what was our original digital library, and that was a great opportunity to not only kind of create a bond between us, so to speak, but also to really save what they had and to create that access, that better preservation for them. But in doing that, we have then created this digital library that is, as Alice and Suzanne were saying, we have now worked with our local South Carolina Digital Library. We were one of the key partners in that in the early stages, early hubs, and then we are also part of the Digital Public Library as well because of that South Carolina Digital Library. So we all meet, a couple times a year. We all get together in South Carolina to try to talk about what's going on and just really form a partnership because we found that, one is great, but 2, 3, 4 or more, voices can be even better when it comes across to trying to get the issue out there. So we do work together with other libraries and museums within the state.
Suzanne, I'm sure as someone who works for a state institution, this is something you deal with a lot, collaboration.
Oh yeah, like everyone else, we have limited funds, but the more people you can find, actually sometimes we end up doing the digitization for other communities, but if you can find someone with the expertise, with the equipment, with the server space, it makes a lot of sense to work with them. So I know in Ohio they have some digitization hubs where that's just what they do. They help other libraries digitize and store their material. And I think that's a model that is going to continue. And it might be your local state library. It might be another organization in your community that you might be able to partner with, and they could help you with maybe metadata, with scanning, with storage. But you need to kind of make those connections, and then they can also help you with marketing your material as well.
Yeah, and I think we all know that when you're in a community of librarians, if there's something you don't know, you probably know somebody who knows it. That's almost always the case. So, Alice, I want to get your thoughts on collaboration as well.
Oh, Dan, that's so true. If you don't know how to do it, somebody else certainly does. And here's the thing that I see with projects. Many projects are not going to happen unless they are part of a collaborative effort, say a local collaborative or even a regional collaborative effort. So I can't impress on people enough the importance of collaboration for digital projects.
All right. Well, we're going to shift gears a little bit because we're getting a few people on Twitter who want us to talk about copyright. So before we even get into this, I just want to say none of us are attorneys, and the standard copyright disclaimer, this is in no way, shape, or form going to be legal advice. But why don't we start with you, Suzanne? What do you think are the key issues that you face in your job when it comes to copyright?
It's always good to play it safe and go pre-1923. If you're before 1923, for the majority of materials, you're probably going to be okay as far as copyright goes. But if you're not sure, then you need to do your due diligence. And that means, did you have a good input record when you received the material? Do you know who it came from? If they had permission to have it. A lot of the family photographs people bring in, they don't actually have copyright to those if it was done at a studio. It belongs to the photographer. So there's a lot of little things like that. But if you're going to be considering that, when people donate material, make sure you have a document where they're giving you the description, how they have it, any background information, if they know if they have ownership of that particular material, and document everything. It will save you a lot of pain later on, and it can take quite a while to find out if you do have permission to have those as well. So always evaluate. Look for the material that you have the most information on to begin with, then put sort of a hierarchy so you can start with the more easy material and have the time to spend on the more questionable material that could possibly take months.
Great. Alice, what do you tell your students about copyright?
Well, I tell them pretty much the same thing that Suzanne just said. Also, I tell them that you really need to understand the very basics of copyright, and I recommend that they all look at Peter Hurdle from Cornell has done a chart on when items go into the public domain. It's very instructive, and it really helps you decide whether you need to do more research or not. So, but definitely everything that Suzanne said, right on the mark there, especially that thing about looking at your ingest records. If you don't have good records of the things that you've received, start right now getting them when you start getting donations for your collection.
And Julie, what about you?
Again, I agree so much with what's already been said. When we first started our project, we were working with groups, institutions that were pretty established and did have a pretty clear copyright, so we were able to proceed pretty easily without too much of a hassle on that. But over the years, as we continue our project, we've been able to work with a lot of people in our community who have brought in their own collections and are sharing those with us. So we've gone from sort of the larger institutions to private families. And so those are, again, like Suzanne and Alice were saying, we just make sure that we have clear ownership, we have papers that are signed, we have documentation so that we know, and then for the future, because, hopefully 100 years from now, whoever's doing my job or whatever version of it exists, they have the courtesy of knowing exactly where these photos came from and that they are what they are. So absolutely, I can't say that enough, to just make sure you have clear paperwork and know that what's coming in belongs to whoever was bringing it in.
Thanks, Julie. And I have pulled up the copyright chart that Alice was talking about from Peter Hurdle at Cornell. Unfortunately, again, I apologize that our chat space isn't working. I can't send the URL into the chat space. If someone could send this out on Twitter, that would be fantastic. It's available here, and it's available as a PDF as well. So a great resource for everybody. So to this point, our discussion has been sort of inward-facing. We've been talking about staff and technology and the challenges facing librarians, but of course the patrons are the people that we live to serve. So let's talk a little bit about the challenges that digitization creates for patrons. So Julie, I want to start with you here. What do you do to make sure that your digital materials are as accessible as possible to your patrons?
Well, our easy answer to that is we do actually have them on a website. And it's www.gcdigital.org. That was one of the things we were able to create with that original grant when we began the project. Was once we had our first collection scanned, we were able to put it online after we had collected the metadata. So really, that's our biggest key there is the website, and people can Google it and find it from any search engine. Of course, we do also do some elements of social media. We have a Facebook page, so we are very much on trying to do things on that regularly, and it's pretty fun to see how people come in from all over. I always say that one of my frequent commenters on that is a family in Ireland that has connections to Georgetown, and they found us through the digital library and have been huge supporters, and they're constantly commenting on the photographs. They love what we're doing. So it really is possible to reach a worldwide audience, with these collections, and it's really been amazing to see the access that we have provided. We have people that use these from news media, local TV stations to ABC News and PBS and so forth have used it. So it is amazing that once you start putting it out there, how people can find these.
Yeah, thank you, Julie. That's very cool that you have that family in Ireland that connected with you.
It is.
Yeah. Suzanne, what about you?
I would say one of the other options, a lot of people are going to find you through Google, but you want to make it findable through your own website. And if you have a great collection that's really helpful, don't hide it. Include it in your link for research resources, or even with some of your other databases, so that people will be more likely to come across that material. If you have a tab for local history, go ahead and include that resource. Some libraries will actually have a little icon on the main page that people just go to access those materials. I would also say social media is a really powerful tool for just increasing awareness of these. And a lot of libraries will now put an image on for Throwback Thursday or Freaky Friday or whatever, and include a link to the collection within that Facebook page or within that tweet, just so that it reminds people that they're there.
All right, thanks. And Alice, over to you.
I totally agree with everything that Julie and Suzanne have said, and I especially want to say that social media is really a very important thing these days. I mean, it really keeps your library out there, it keeps your patrons informed of what you're doing, and it keeps them interested in your digital images.
Well, that's a perfect transition point to the second part of the question, which you've already sort of answered. So, Alice, I'll stick with you here. But beyond just making things accessible, how do you market things to people? How do you make sure as many people in your community of patrons are as aware of things as they can be?
Well, that's really difficult because my community is a little different than Suzanne and Julie's. So social media is really one of the biggest ways, I think. And but I can tell you some ways that libraries in Illinois have done this through grant projects that I've been monitors for. They have some libraries have a weekly radio show, if you can believe this. It's a little like a 5-minute little podcast that they do, and a lot of libraries will take a grant program and they'll say, oh, I've got this digitization program and here's what we're doing. But I think you just have to keep getting out there, whether it's in your local paper but I think social media reaches so much farther than anything these days.
Thanks, Alice. And Suzanne, I want to go over to you, and it'll be interesting I want to hear how your answer and Julie's answer compare and contrast, because Julie, you're serving a county, and Suzanne, you're serving a university and entire state. So, Suzanne, how do you market your digital collections?
Well, we use social media, which is, of course, a very big issue. But I would also remind people too, YouTube is a huge resource, and we've been doing also some oral histories where you can then put those materials on YouTube for everybody to see. I would also recommend trying to remember just to incorporate that regularly into other aspects of the library. So if you are having an exhibit or an event that's utilizing some of those images, have an online exhibit along with that will put people in connection with those collections as well. We have screens up throughout the library to promote different events and collections. Put it on there as well. And just continue to just incorporate it into your everyday marketing events and resources.
All right. And Julie, what do you do?
Well, just like they said, social media and marketing really does play an important part. It's within our local library. We have signs up. We have photographs that have been framed in a large scale, so it really does attract people. Because of partnerships with other libraries and the DPLA and so forth, we kind of can piggyback off of their promotional marketing things. But we also did something very simple a few years ago, is we reprinted some of our photographs in postcard version and gave those away, and those were enormously popular. Again, people love photographs of any sort, and old photographs of Georgetown were a hit, and so people just collected those and sent them to family and friends, and it's just, a great way to not only share the photograph, but on the back was our little logo with a website, and hopefully something like that will just encourage people all over to just kind of log in. So I think it's also, you have to be consistent. We did a lot of advertising when we first created the digital library, but we've continued to do that. So I continue to do talks in the community. I continue to go to conferences and just represent and kind of keep us out there and fresh in everyone's mind.
All right, thanks, Julie. So we've got about 10 minutes left. So again, everyone who's been with us, you've seen we are having a technical issue with our chat space, so I'm sorry about that. But if you have questions or comments for our panelists, you can use Twitter #ALLive for any questions or comments you have. I actually do see we have a question. Where did it go? We had a question about accession collections. Oh, maybe it'll come back. I don't see it anymore. So we'll move on. And Alice, I want to start with you here, since you do teach LIS students. one of the cool things about digitization is as you learn about it and as you learn new technologies, for your own professional development, you gain new skills. So I want to talk, when librarians learn about digitization, what sort of new opportunities are they creating for themselves, and what kind of non-traditional jobs and responsibilities are out there in digitization?
Well, there's all kinds of cool things. You know, Library schools have typically been very responsive to the needs of the community, to the needs of future librarians and current librarians. And in fact, one of the things that we've done at San Jose is we now have an advanced certificate in strategic management of digital assets and services. And this covers topics like metadata and digital curation and digitization and all those things. But I think that there's all kinds of really interesting jobs out there. I was just looking in preparation for this. I was looking at job titles, and I found some fascinating things like metadata coordinator, digital project manager, digital library developer, digital infrastructure and technology coordinators. There's just digital consortium managers. There's all kinds of amazing, interesting new jobs out there that don't don't look or seem like the traditional library job of the past. It's really it's a brave new world, and I'm very excited about it.
Yeah, and I'll go over to you, Julie, because you are one of those people with a cool non-traditional job. So, what are your thoughts on the type of opportunities people can create for themselves?
I think, like Alice said, there are just all sorts of possibilities out there. Since I've been doing this, I've been able to work with a lot of the academic libraries, and it's interesting to see the different paths that the digital world has taken within the academic libraries, but also in the public libraries. I see a lot of people that are, starting out in one area and then working into the digital path. So I think there are just a lot of possibilities. I think people can work in academic, they work in public, but they can also work in other groups, other museums, for instance, like I mentioned. I have sort of a background in that area, so it's interesting for me to see some of the larger museums that have collections of historic papers and that sort of thing, perhaps presidential and that sort, but and how they're becoming more aware of the importance of digitization. So they're now hiring a digital library background to try to preserve those too. So really, I think there's a wide spectrum of positions that can be available.
Okay, thanks. And Suzanne?
I would say website development and web management as well. Social media management is going to continue to grow. I would also add into that publishing, because in some ways we are actually publishing a lot of material. And although we tend to focus on materials that's already been created, there's a lot of opportunity too for bringing in community work and to help to push that out to a larger audience as well. And it could be as simple as every year you have a contest for students to write poetry, and then you digitally publish that material. And that's more born digital, but it's definitely a continuation of what we're doing, but with a bit of a twist.
All right, and I'll start with you on this question. This is another audience question, Julie. So we'll start with you. How do you assess the use of your digital collections? And I know there's probably a complicated answer to that, but if you can give us the condensed version.
Well, one of the easiest ways that we have of sort of tracking how our items are being accessed is really the emails and the questions and so forth that we get weekly for photo use, for asking various functions that they want to use the photographs for. So that's one really easy, obvious way that we can track it. We can go through weeks where we can get multiple requests for using it in a journal or a TV program or something. So that's a great, really wonderful way to see it. Of course, we also use Google Analytics. The site itself has some tracking abilities, so we can pull numbers and that sort of thing off. So, but numbers are not as much fun as the emails and those personal contacts. So, but those together really do give us a great idea of how we're reaching our audience.
Okay, Suzanne, how about you?
I agree. Google Analytics is a really great tool that's pretty commonly used. I would say that there's another one that was actually developed by the University of North Texas that also logs how long people were looking at an item. So you know how much they were actually interacting with the site and with the specific material. And of course, like all the feedback that you get from people, also take a look at how many times the Facebook post was shared, how many times the Twitter was retweeted, and take a look at the whole slew of different sources to get an idea of what kind of attention these materials really are getting.
All right. And I see, Alice, you're back with us. So, Alice, I'll let you get a first crack at what'll probably be our final question today. So this is a pretty forward-facing topic, digitization. This is a very future-oriented topic. So can you just talk about what do you think the key changes are going to be in the next 3 to 5 years? How do you think digitization itself is going to transform, and how do you think it's going to change libraries as a whole?
You know, I was thinking about that today, and I really believe that digitization is going to be no longer a luxury for libraries. It's going to be a key service, and I think it's because we have to keep ourselves meaningful to our community. And you know, as I said in the beginning, the access to these materials that we have that are so unique and historical is really important. And a couple of years ago, I heard Eli Nyberger speak, and he said that traditionally libraries, their role was to bring the world to their community. And now it's our job to bring the community, our community, to the world. And that's what we do with digitization. We bring our community to the world. We show them that history, the cultural materials, the unique materials we have. And I think that, as I said, I really think this historical value that digitization is going to be a key service. No longer something, can we do it, but how are we going to do it?
All right, thanks, Alice. Julie, same question. What do you think the key changes are going to be in the next few years?
Well, I really think what Alice was saying is great. I mean, I like the idea that we're bringing our world to our community, because that's what we really try to do in Georgetown, is we try to encourage people and really educate people on what the history of Georgetown is. So I think really, and we also have been working to encourage, as we said, not just institutions that have the resources or the time or the staff, but also private citizens, and encourage them as a library, as a leader in the preservation of their own documents, because so many of their families have their own personal archive that needs to be preserved. And so I think that's one thing that the library would really help to encourage and to really lead the way in, is that preservation within on that personal level. But I think the libraries, will continue to do what we do. We really do continue to increase more access, and really continue to bring the idea that it's not just something that one small group can do, but that everybody at a larger scale can do.
All right, thanks, Julie. And Suzanne, we'll let you have the final word.
Ooh.
A lot
So
of pressure.
I know so much. I really see an increase in activity within the community, and that this is really something that we can use to increase that interaction, and at the same time to show how much we appreciate our community, and to really reinforce the partnership between the people who come in the doors or the people who just look at our websites. And I also see increasing collaboration as we start to build more and more of these resources, which people absolutely do love. We're going to need to share some of the resources in order to support all of that. And I see a lot more work in preservation and how to maintain all of these materials.
All right, thanks, Suzanne, and I think that's a great point to close on. So, Alice, Julie, and Suzanne, I want to thank you for being such a wonderful panel. I want to thank our audience for all the wonderful comments and questions, and I want to thank the San Jose State University School of Information for their sponsorship and helping make today's event possible. So stay tuned. We'll be back next month. We will be talking about a new topic next month. I think we'll be talking about power searching, if I have our schedule right. But again, I want to just thank everybody, audience, panelists, sponsors, participants. You all helped to make this such a great episode today. I'm sorry, we'll be talking on October 8th about web-scale discovery services. Power searching is in November. So again, thanks everybody, and hope we see you at another episode of AL Live. Please feel free to keep the discussion going on Twitter, and have a great day.